The most feared bodyguards in medieval Europe were not Byzantine. They were Vikings, and they left their names scratched into the greatest church on earth. To understand how Vikings ended up guarding the Roman emperor, you have to follow the rivers. 1,000 years ago, Scandinavians did not only raid west, toward England and Francia. They also bled east, down the great rivers of what is now Ukraine. Norse traders and raiders pushed deeper every year, drawn toward a city whose name in Old Norse was Miklagard, the great city. These men called themselves Varangians. They traded furs, slaves, and amber for silk and silver. But the real prize was something no northern king could match: Byzantine coin. The empire paid its soldiers in gold, reliably, for centuries. And in the 980s, the emperor needed soldiers very badly. The Varangian Guard was born from desperation. The year was 987. The emperor was Basil II, 29 years old, battle-hardened, outnumbered. A rebel general named Bardus Phocas had risen in the east. It was marching on Constantinople with an army that dwarfed anything the emperor could field. Basil was cornered in the capital, staring at the walls, calculating how long they would hold. And then he did something remarkable. He sent envoys north, not to another empire but to a man ruling a cold frontier principality called Kiev, Vladimir the Great. The deal they struck was one of the strangest in medieval diplomacy. Vladimir would send 6,000 Varangian warriors, hardened axemen who had fought for him across the Rus for years, to crush Phocas. In return, Vladimir demanded two things: the hand of the emperor's sister, Anna, in marriage, and conversion of himself and his people to Orthodox Christianity. 6,000 warriors, not mercenaries you hired for a season, not allies who might change sides, men who had already proven their loyalty, and now owed it to the emperor. Basil marched them east, straight at Phocas. At Chrysopolis, the Varangians smashed through the rebel line. At Abydos, they finished the job. Phocas died in the field. Basil had his empire back. And then the emperor made a decision that would reshape Byzantine military history. He did not send the Varangians home. From that moment, the heir of Augustus and Constantine was guarded by men from the frozen north. The Varangian Guard became a permanent institution. The emperor's personal bodyguard, the palace garrison, the treasury watch. In battle, they formed a steel wall around the imperial person, a mobile fortress of men who stood head and shoulders above most Mediterranean soldiers. One Byzantine chronicler called them the axe-bearing barbarians, and meant it as a compliment. The axe was their signature. The Dane axe, a weapon so heavy it required both hands, capable of splitting a man from shoulder to hip. In palace ceremony, the axes were grounded beside the throne, silent monuments of violence ready to wake. In battle, they rose and fell like hammers, and the Varangians were paid in ways no other soldiers could dream of. They had the right to polutasvarf, palace plunder, a Norse custom the emperors honored. When an emperor died, the Varangians could walk through the imperial treasury and take as much gold and silver as each man could carry in his arms. Some men retired to Scandinavia wealthy beyond anything their homeland could offer, dressed in silk, carrying Byzantine gold, telling stories no one in the north quite believed. And one of them became a king. Around 1034, a young Norwegian prince arrived in Constantinople with nothing but a sword and a name he had not yet earned. Harald Sigurdsson. The sagas later called him Hardrada, hard ruler. He was 15 when he fought his first battle, on the losing side, in Norway, against the king who had killed his half-brother. Wounded and exiled, he fled east. Constantinople was the place a displaced prince could rebuild everything. Harald rose fast. Within a year or two, he commanded a Varangian company. He was deployed where the empire was bleeding, the Byzantine reconquest of Sicily, where Arab Emirates had held the island for a century and a half. From Sicily, he went to North Africa, then to the Holy Land, where according to the sagas he personally cleared the pilgrim route to Jerusalem of bandits. Then back to Constantinople, promoted again, leading the guard through palace intrigues, accumulating a fortune in imperial pay and spoils. By the time Harald left Byzantine service around 1042, he was the most famous Varangian of them all. He sailed north with ships filled with gold, married a Tief princess, and in 1046 seized the throne of Norway. The Varangian exile had become a king. 20 years later in 1066, Harald Hardrada died at Stamford Bridge in England. An arrow to the throat, fighting for yet another throne. 3 days after his death, William the Conqueror landed. The Viking Age died with Harald, but the guard he had served still stood, and it was about to receive reinforcements from the most unexpected place. Walk into Hagia Sophia today, the 6th century cathedral that was the spiritual center of the Byzantine world for 1,000 years. And you will see marble, gold, mosaics, and something no tour guide points out. In the upper gallery on the marble balustrade, someone scratched letters into the stone. They are runes. 2 inscriptions survive. One reads approximately, Halfdan carved these runes. Another, more fragmentary, seems to spell a Norse name, perhaps Ari. A Varangian stood in the holiest church in Christendom, pulled out a blade, and wrote his name. The same impulse that would put a teenager's tag on a subway wall, except Halfdan was a man who had killed for the emperor, whose cathedral he was standing in. He was not the only one. In 2014, researchers confirmed a 3rd possible inscription on the gallery rail. Think about the man who did this. He stood beneath a dome that had no equal on earth, surrounded by gold mosaics of saints and emperors, and he carved his name like he was marking a tree in a northern forest. To a Varangian, Hagia Sophia was not remote holiness. It was a place they walked through every day, guarding the emperor while he prayed. It was part of their territory, and their territory by the late 11th century was filling with new voices. In 1066, the same year Harald Hardrada fell at Stamford Bridge, something happened in England that reshaped the Varangian Guard from across the continent. William the Conqueror won at Hastings. The Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was crushed. Thousands of English warriors, Fagnans, housecarls, men who had fought in Harold Godwinson's shield wall, lost everything. Lands confiscated, titles stripped, no king to serve, no home, and they knew one thing about the world. In Constantinople, the emperor paid gold for men who could swing an axe. So they sailed east. By the thousands, over years and decades, Anglo-Saxon exiles joined the Varangian ranks. The guard transformed. What had been Norse became increasingly English. The axes stayed the same. The loyalty stayed the same. The accent in the barracks shifted. By the time of the First Crusade, you could walk into the Varangian quarters and hear Old English spoken alongside Old Norse, Scandinavian runes in Hagia Sophia, Anglo-Saxon prayers in the barracks. And then in 1204, the unthinkable happened. The Fourth Crusade, a Christian army, turned on Constantinople. The Varangians fought with the ferocity their reputation demanded, but the city fell. Constantinople was sacked by men who wore the cross. The Byzantine Empire shattered. The Guard endured. It survived the sack, the Latin occupation, the Byzantine restoration in 1261. It was still on the palace rolls in the early 1400s, but it was a memory of itself. Fewer men, leaner pay, an empire too diminished to afford the golden wall of axes it once commanded. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the Varangian Guard was gone. Its last mention had vanished from the records decades earlier. They did not die in a final heroic stand. They just stopped being mentioned. The axemen from the north guarded 13 centuries of Roman emperors. Then the record simply closes on them, as quiet as Halfdan's chisel. 6,000 Norse warriors traveled a river road to a city of gold and stayed to guard an empire. They wrote their names in the greatest church on earth. They were paid in gold, loyal beyond reason, terrifying to face. And when the Viking Age died, their ghosts survived inside the walls of Constantinople. An English voice now, still swinging the same axe, for another 400 years. No other bodyguard corps in human history lasted so long, traveled so far, or fell so silently. If this changed how you see the Vikings, subscribe. We reconstruct a lost world every week. He rose from exile to command the Emperor's elite guard, fought across 3 continents, and returned to Norway with ships filled with Byzantine gold. The boy who fled became a king. His full story is on our channel. This is the marble balustrade of Hagia Sophia, and this is a Viking's name, carved into it 1,000 years ago. He wrote his name in the greatest church on earth, because he walked it every day guarding the emperor at prayer. The ruins are still there, See who he was on our channel. How did axe-wielding Norsemen end up guarding the most powerful man in the Christian world? It started with a river. They rowed 1,000 miles south on the Dnieper, to a city they called Miklagard, the Great City. Then the emperor made them an offer no northern king could match. The full story is on our channel. The year was 1204. A Christian army surrounded Constantinople. The Crusaders, sent to fight Muslims, had turned on the Christian East. Inside the walls, the emperor's last line of defense raised their axes. They were not Byzantine, they were Norse and English, the Varangian Guard. They fought like legends, but the city fell. Full story on our channel.